This UCSD TV program is a presentation of University of California Television for educational and non-commercial use only.
So this talk is about partner choice markets and the evolution of cooperation. And let me start by explaining what I mean by the term trade. This is usually supposed to be a mutually beneficial exchange of materials or services. And in some sense, one could say when something is mutually beneficial, it should occur. But suppose that you see this basket of apple that you might buy from a farmer. And it would be nice for you to have these wonderful apples, and it would be nice for the farmer to get the money. But despite the fact that that would be mutually beneficial, there might be another deal. There might be another farmer having the same apples for a lower price or better apples and so forth. So a better deal may be possible with another partner, and this is the flavor of a market. This is the most essential feature of a market. Now, markets do occur in principle in the animal world, but I will start with a fictitious example in order to show why it is interesting to look at the animal world in terms of markets. Here we see a fictitious boa. We called it the boa constrictor because it's not a real thing. And the bird that you see is a shadow bird. They don't exist either. And our boa lives in a very hot area. It is very good at defending the eggs, but very bad at providing shade, at protecting it from solar radiation. The poor shadow bird is very bad at protecting her eggs, but she is very good at shading them. So what would you expect to happen? You would well, what could happen in principle in evolution is that the boa allows the shadow bird to lay eggs together with the boa, and then the bird would protect these eggs from solar radiation. A perfect deal. The boa defends the eggs, and they get shaded by the shadow birds. Now, when you look at this shadow bird, it has a very short tail. That's not so good for providing shade. Imagine that there would be variation among tail lengths in shadow birds, and that the boa would have a choice between different shadow birds. Of course, the boa now would choose the one with the longer tail. And as a result, you would see the evolution of elongated tails in the shadow birds. Now, why is this interesting? In the spirit of this example, for example, partner choice could have promoted the evolution of prosocial tendencies in humans, despite the fact that these tendencies are costly. But the question is, have we ever seen the evolution of partner choice leading to a change in properties of other animals? And so what I want to do now is to give you an example, which is not exactly the shadow bird, of course. And when we thought about introducing the market idea in biology, this was together with Ronald Noé, we thought that maybe that a phenomenon described by ornithologists, namely delayed plumage maturation in male birds, that might be driven by social partner choice. Now, how would that happen? Here you see a lazuli bunting, a very brightly colored animal. And what Green and others have shown is that yearlings, males that are sexually mature, differ tremendously in their coloration. Some still look like kids, and others look like real adult males. And you wonder, why would a male want to look like a kid? And so that is probably not very good if you want to be chosen by a female. Now here we see a situation out in the field. There's one, the bird on the left is what I call the principal. This is only because I want to use some terminology from economics. In biological terms, he is the owner of a territory, of a mating territory, and he's in control of what happens in this territory. Now the other bird is that I call the agent here because I want to relate this all to a theory called principal-agent models in economics. The other bird is a yearling, and as you can see, the coloration is much less bright than that of the principal. So he gets permission by the principal to settle in the territory of the principal, but an important prerequisite for this is the dull coloration. The principals only accept dull-looking males as social partners in their mating territories. These males, that I call agents here, can attract a female. They are allowed to attract a female. That's actually the whole point why they get permission to stay in the territory. But they have to share the female with the principal. Not unheard of, by the way, in human societies. And as a result, we think, now the interesting what Green and Al have shown is that these dull males, although they don't look very malish, actually are fairly successful in terms of the offspring they produce. And so it seems to be advantageous to look young in these birds. And the funny thing is that social selection here drives the birds to have dull colors, whereas sexual selection would do exactly the opposite, as we have seen in many other examples. Now let's look for a second how the buntings accomplish their trade. The important thing is that the principal dictates the terms of the exchange. It's in he has the power to enforce his interests. This is why he gets access to the other guy's female. And the agent, the dull-looking male, pursues his own interest. Of course, he is interested in mating, having offspring, and he will look after the offspring because at least some of the offspring is his. So they both look very much in their own interest. There is not much concern about others. There's no contract, and it's a fairly selfish behavior that explains this cooperation. Now, there are two things that I find important. First of all, that what the agent does by pursuing his own interest as a byproduct contributes to the principal's reproductive success. We often find that in cooperation, that what one of the partners does is done for certain reasons, and as a byproduct it helps someone else. And the other thing is that there's no contract. Now, an economist would be astonished to see this. Why do biologists talk about markets when there are no enforceable contracts? Because much of the conventional theory in economics is based on the idea that you can have a contract. Because only then can you bargain over what is the price of this car when you want to buy it and so forth, and then settle on something, and then you will actually get the car for this price. In the animal world, there is no contract, and whatever they bargain about, the price doesn't matter because they wouldn't get it anyway, perhaps. And so I must come up here with a warning. In biology, the famous law of supply and demand that we are so used to, at least in textbook, in conventional textbook economics, does not apply. And let me give you, instead, I mean, one has to really be worried about the question, how can power be exercised? How is cheating controlled? What is the cost of changing partners? What do individuals know about alternatives? All these things, you really have to worry about what determines the terms of exchange. Only then can you start modeling this. You cannot rely blindly on something like a law of supply and demand. Now let me give one well-known example that shows, I mean, how far away you get from the law of supply and demand. And this is the mating market. I think I don't have to say what that is. Now, in textbooks, what you now find very often is a basic story that is boring because we've heard it so often, that eggs are big, like in this case, exaggerated, and sperm small. And if you if you take into account that males and females exist in roughly equal numbers, then this has, of course, a consequence that very often what we would observe in populations is an excessive production of sperm. And if you look at mating from a market point of view, would say there is an exchange that takes place. The male gets eggs to be fertilized, and the female gets sperm to fertilize her eggs, and so forth. But there is this incredibly excessive overproduction of sperm, and that, as an economist, you would say, if there were enforceable contracts, females could easily ask a high price from their mates. In biological reality, this gift seems often rather paltry. And females may even receive a poison instead of a diamond, as we see it, for example, in fruit flies, where males inject a protein that is good for the male because he will father more offspring of this female, but the female, over her lifetime, will have fewer offspring, which she doesn't care about. So I think that the animal world demonstrates impressively how narrow the scope for cooperation becomes in the absence of enforceable contracts. Now, the absence of enforceable contract does not mean, of course, that there is no sanctioning. In nature, we heard already some examples today. So let me go a little bit, but then you have to really worry about what is the nature of the sanctioning, what is possible, what is not possible. And in evolutionary ecology, people got very interested in, for example, in mutualisms like the one between leguminous plants and bacteria. These bacteria fix atmospheric nitrogen inside what's called root nodules. Let me just show what these things look like. And they get something in return from the plant. So this seems to be a mutually beneficial. I mean, it's a mutualism. There's no question about that. And what people have done is they have, for example, made experiments to make it impossible for the bacteria to fix the nitrogen, and ask, I mean, how would the plant react to that? And the plant then abandons that part of the root system, and people have interpreted that as sanctioning. But there is now, in the current literature, people are worried that this might be a wrong interpretation, because a plant always would abandon tissue that doesn't work properly. You always see, when a branch is damaged or so, you see it will be a dead branch. That is the most normal thing for the plant to do, to just give up parts of it that don't work properly. So what's called sanctioning here did not evolve for the purpose of sanctioning these bacteria. It probably evolved as a very general feature of the plant to deal with any kind of damage. Perhaps the effect is a little stronger in the presence of these bacteria, but nobody has shown this. So here again, we see that something that seems to be functional in order to make cooperation work is only a byproduct of something else. Now I come to another example of altruistic sanctioning. Actually, I come to an example of altruistic sanctioning, since we talk about altruism here. And you will first not even see what on earth this has to do with altruistic sanctioning, because I talk about indirect reciprocity. Indirect reciprocity is a principle where you would say, when others are in need of help, give aid, help them, but restrict your help to those recipients that have a positive reputation, being good guys, well-behaved. And this is, in some sense, this is also a form of partner choice, because when people act like this, then you will see all this aid giving among those who are good guys, and the bad guys will not receive aid. Because now, this is one way of how one might explain what looks like altruism. And it was, I think, first suggested by Dick Alexander, whose name we heard several times today. Robert Sugden then gave it the first formal treatment that was not widely recognized, and then Martin Nowak and Carl Sigmund came up with a model where they tried to show how this can work. Let me go quickly into this. What Nowak and Sigmund did was they looked at a specific updating rule for the reputation, which was as follows. Suppose that someone is asked for help. First of all, you are born with a neutral reputation. And then if you are asked for help and you don't help, others watch that and your reputation goes down by one unit in the mathematical model. On the other hand, when you are observed to help, your reputation increases by 1 unit. That was their model. So very simple, is a very simple way of updating the reputation. If you help, you score a point. If you don't help, you lose 1. And then they tried to convince the community that, that this kind of strategy would be an evolutionarily stable strategy that you would expect to find. Actually, they did simulations to show that. But they did these simulations in an extremely small population that consisted only of 100 individuals, the entire population. And then randomness, random effects play a major role in what you see as the outcome of such a simulation. Ole Lehmer and I repeated these simulations, and what we found was that in a decently sized population, the whole phenomenon disappears. These strategies are not stable, they will not evolve, they will not be maintained in evolution, and the main reason is because the updating rule that they use leads to altruistic punishment. Why is that so? Now suppose that I'm asked for help, and I'm supposed to help someone, say Randy, and Randy has a bad score. He is below 0 in this case. Of course, in reality, it's the opposite. Now, if I then decide not to help him, it looks as if this would be good for me because I don't have to pay the price of helping him. But in your eyes, by not helping Randy, I lose reputation. And in these models, that effect is stronger than this what I would gain by not providing the help. And so there is an altruistic element in their story that they've completely overlooked in the first place because they had this very small population where the mathematical model goes bananas and something. Now, Sugden had already given the problem profounder treatment, and we also worked a little more on this. And the most important point here is, I mean, he talks about good and bad standing, just 2 different states in which you can be. And the important point is that the donors who do not help a recipient in bad standing just keep their good standing. This is important. Now one could say, doesn't this solve all problems? But the point is that what we can see is that the logic of indirect reciprocity either requires altruistic sanctioning, that was the Novak and Sigmund model, or when we follow Sugden, it requires high cognitive skills, because now you always have to worry, okay, Peter didn't help, but how about Randy? Is he really a bad guy or so? No, of course he's not. He's a good guy and so forth. So there's confusion about all these things. And it's much harder to play the strategy that Sugden suggested. And this brings me to my final slide. I'm a good guy, you know. And yeah, I think that there is one problem with understanding cooperation and altruism. As humans, we are born to be virtuous musicians in a social concert, and this very fact makes it very difficult for us to understand what it takes to be social and to make the social concerts sound so well. In the animal world, I think we often have it's amazing how little it takes to get certain forms of cooperation to work without concern about others and all this. And we are so deeply into this that we can hardly imagine such a world to exist. I think that's also one of your messages, and we have to understand these little building blocks well.